name is Robert Bodily. People also call me Bob Bodily. I'm going through an identity crisis, whether I should be known as Bob or Robert, so maybe at the end we can talk about it and you guys can help me with my crisis. Slides are available right now if you go to my website, just down there at the bottom, bobbodily.com. If you go to robertbodily.com, it will redirect to bobbodily.com. So I've thought of everything. And then on the right-hand side, there's a recent presentations, and there's a link to a SlideShare presentation right there. So instead of taking pictures of the screen, if you just want the whole presentation to share, that will probably be more helpful for everyone. I also collaborated with Katrien Verbert from University of Leuven. And this is the first article of my dissertation, and it is a literature review on student-facing learning analytics reporting systems. To try to smash down 94 research articles that were written up in a literature review within 20 minutes is going to be a challenge. So halfway through, we'll kind of take a break and stretch out a little bit, and you guys can relax, and then we'll go back at it. All right, so the research questions that I want to address in this review. Number one, what types of features do these systems have? Looking at functionality. Number two, what are the different types of data that these systems collected? And number three, how are the systems analyzed in terms of design? For example, did they do a needs assessment or an evaluation? What are student perceptions of these systems, and what are the actual effects of these systems on student behavior and student achievement? I should have duplicated screen on this Mac, but now I'm awkwardly turning around. So the focus of my literature review is specifically on student-facing learning analytics reporting systems. So this encompasses recommender systems or dashboards or intelligent tutoring systems or feedback systems that track learning analytics data and report it directly to students. So you can see in this figure on the right, there are four kind of main fields. And if the field or if the system is directly facing students, then it was included in the literature review. So that was my inclusion criteria. And this is kind of a interesting way to show my methodology. So on the x-axis, you can see that there's some sources that are purely education, some that are education and computer science, and some are strictly computer science. And then on the y-axis, conference proceedings, journal articles, and literature reviews. So in order to have a rigorous methodology, we had specific search queries, and you can find those actually in the paper. And we searched in IEEE Explore to find computer science presentations and ACM database, computers and applied sciences. Also, all the learning analytics and educational data mining conference proceedings. And then we found articles we may have missed in other literature reviews conducted by Schwendemann or Katrien Verbert or Droxler, Romero, and Ventura. And then we used Google Scholar to conduct some targeted searching based on all of the keywords we found in the titles of the articles found everywhere else. And so we were hoping to get a pretty comprehensive look at the field of student-facing reporting systems. So once we collected all of the articles, there were about 945 returned in the initial search, and then based on our inclusion criteria, we ended up with 94 articles in our final analysis. Each of these articles was coded based on categories that we derived from the previous literature reviews that were listed on our methodology. And then we double coded 20% of the articles to ensure accuracy, and we had an 86% coder agreement rate. And these were the coding categories: functionality of the system, data sources tracked, design analyses conducted, student perceptions, actual measured effects, and then student use. Within each of those categories, we had subcategories. So within the functionality category, we tagged each system based on whether it discussed the purpose of the system, which was all of the articles, because It would be hard to talk about a system without talking about its purpose. Whether it included data mining, visualizations, class comparison, recommendations, feedback, or some interactivity component. And each of these will be further defined for specifically what we were looking at in our review. So for the purpose of the system, all of the systems were categorized based on their purpose, and we grouped them into the following categories, the most popular being awareness or reflection, second most popular being to recommend resources, and then the third most popular was to improve retention or engagement, and then there were a couple other disparate purposes. So that's a summary of the purposes of these systems. For this article, maybe data mining was the wrong word to use, but the data mining category included articles that did any kind of statistical procedure to the data before it was reported to students beyond descriptive statistics. So if they just did the mean of some value, then we didn't count that, but anything beyond that, any kind of comparison, any kind of social network analysis or text mining, that was all just clumped. That was all just clumped into the data mining category. About half of the articles included a data mining component. And we kind of noticed that there were two types of articles. There were the dashboard articles and there were the recommender system articles, which isn't super surprising considering those are two different fields. But there were a few that included both a visualization and a recommender system component, about 17% of articles, so 16 articles. The types of visualizations are summarized in the table on the right, with bar chart, line chart, table, network graph being the most common, not surprisingly. What was kind of surprising is in the other category, there were 23 visualizations and they were the only instance of that visualization. So there were a lot of really unique types of visualizations being used. And a couple examples are included here in the other category. It's kind of hard to understand what they are just by the name. I probably should have just grabbed a screenshot of what they were, but you could probably look them up and see what they look like. So that's a summary of the visualization types. The class comparison category is defined as any system that allowed students to compare their data with some other reference group. It could have been students in the class, it could have been A students in the class, it could have been historical A students. And about a third of the articles included a class comparison component. But the questions that have yet to be addressed include what kind of effects do these class comparisons have on students? Which students are motivated by comparison? Which students are demotivated, unmotivated by comparison? And what effect does personalizing a system based on the student have? What effect does that have on student achievement? Recommendations were defined as a system that is explicitly telling the user what to do because of what has happened in the course. Almost half of the systems included a recommendation component, and it was almost all of the same articles that had a data mining component as well. So 78% of data mining articles also provided recommendations. And future research that wasn't really addressed is what are the differences between transparent recommendations and more black box recommendations? What effect does that have on students, specifically student trust with the system? These questions should be addressed in further research. The feedback category was defined as purely text feedback because visualizations were taken care of in a different category and recommendations were taken care of, so feedback was specifically just text feedback. And 18% of the articles provided text feedback. It was used frequently for just-in-time feedback and not as frequently for unit level or concept level feedback. The interactivity category was, I guess, this article was coded as being in the interactivity category if it allowed the user to interact in some way. This could have been filtering based on time. It could have been clicking on something and popping something else up. Any way to interact with the visualization or recommendation. There were 31% of systems that included an interactivity component. And unfortunately, not a lot of articles tracked how students interacted with these features. And so future research can look at how students interact with these data visualizations or recommendations. This is a summary table of the resources that were tracked and reported in these systems. So the most common being resource use, not surprisingly, with 76% of articles including resource use. And then assessment data, social interaction data, and time spent data were also very prevalent. Other sensor data and manually reported data were not very common, but I'm sure we'll see that area growing. Okay, so that was a lot of data, a lot of talking. It's time to take a break and reflect on the difficulties of writing a literature review. So this is PhD Comics. He says, so I'm hoping to get results by, you're hoping to get results? Let me tell you, in your research, either you do or you don't. There is no hope. In fact, you should remove that word entirely from your vocabulary. To be honest, I lost that word a long time ago. I should hope so. Sometimes you feel that way writing a literature review. Okay, another one from our good friend Boromir. One does not simply write a literature review. That is also true. There is a price to pay with writing and synthesizing and reading hundreds of articles. But once you do so, you feel like you can talk meaningfully about a subject. And so I can say on the other end, it's a price worth paying. All right, confused student, searches on Google. Your search returns 0 results. Research, that moment when not even Google knows what you're talking about. And then concerned student, I broke Google. Sometimes in a literature review, you have to think of different words to explain similar topics, and you think you've finally found everything, and then you realize that someone has been researching this for the past 20 years, calling it something different, and you have to double the size of your review. And so this is very common. Okay, student, he finally finishes, final.doc. And then professor reviews it, okay, final_revision.2.doc. And after another review, final_revision.6.comments, .corrections, .io, !, exclamation point, why did I come to school, question mark, .doc. I think this happens a lot as well. You finally have what you think is a finished version, you send it to your advisor, and then you have finally another finished version, and you send it to the person you worked with, and you have another finished version. And this continual revision process, I think, is common with a literature review. Okay, after that lighthearted discussion, now let's get back to a results presentation. So for the design analysis category, there were 4 subcategories: needs assessment, information selection, visual design, and usability testing. And I'll talk about each one of these individually. So a needs assessment was if the authors reported on asking students what they wanted to see in a dashboard or a recommender system. And only 6% of the articles included a needs assessment. I'm sure many more were thinking about things in this way, but they didn't actually include it in their write-up of the article. A really good example of a needs assessment was done by Santos, Verbert, Govert, and Duval, 2013. They surveyed students to identify needs. They then had students rate the needs based on the most prevalent responses. And then they targeted the most important, feasible student responses with their system. And so future research should take an approach similar to this one in specifically addressing student needs. I know that students don't all the time say what they actually want. They say what they think they want, which may or may not be what they really need. So take these results however you want. Information selection is defined as providing justification for the data collected. Many times we simply collect the data that we have or that we have easy access to, and we don't make an effort to collect data that we actually need. And a few good examples, Ott, Robbins, Hayden, and Shepard did a really thorough examination of the literature to identify predictors to include in their dashboard. Field 2015 did exploratory data analysis, and the last one, I don't want to say all the names, used a theoretical framework to identify what they should include in their system. Visual design, same thing as information selection, but for the visualization chosen. Only 13% discussed visual design. Olmos and Katrien, 2012, did a really good job at this, and they reported on each step of their iterative design cycle and process. A lot of articles just reported the final result, and that wasn't as meaningful as reporting on the first prototype and then the evaluation in the second prototype and the evaluation in the third prototype. So future research should consider justifications, including justifications for visual design. 10%, about 10% reported conducting a usability test. This is more than just surveying students, asking them what they thought of the usability of the system. A good example, there are a couple good examples here. One used the system usability scale, a validated scale to test the usability of a system. And then the best example was probably Santos, Boticario, and Perez Marin that brought in a usability and inaccessibility expert and evaluated how usable and accessible their system was. Student perceptions were grouped into the following categories: usability, satisfaction, and then whether the user thought that the system had an effect on behavior, achievement, or skills. Surprisingly, only 2 articles asked students if they thought it was effective. I don't know that that's as important as actually finding out if it's effective, but I think student perceptions matter because if they think that it's making a difference, they'll probably trust the system more and use the system more than otherwise. Okay, actual measured effects. I want everyone to we're just going to read this slide for a really long time. I wanted to include this information, but I didn't actually want to talk about it, so I created a shortened version, which is still kind of dense. I apologize. Just read the bolded parts. So there were 3 articles that looked at student behavior change that had a sample size greater than 150 and had a rigorous randomized control trial research design. Of those, the first article saw post-quantity increase for 2 of the visualizations and post-quantity decrease for 1 of the visualizations, so mixed results. The second one saw students log in more frequently, complete their coursework more quickly, complete more questions, and answer more questions. So I would say success. And the final one, no significant differences. So we get mixed results, success, and no significant difference. So overall, still an emerging field. We'll see, once we have 10 or 15 articles that have done something like this, we'll see what the results are. So maybe a kind of promising outcome here. Here's the student achievement change. Again, I just wanted to include that information. Here's the summarized version. There were 4 articles that had a sample size greater than 150 and conducted a rigorous randomized controlled trial design. The first one, no significant difference. Second one, no significant difference. Third one, no significant difference. And fourth one, significant difference. So again, some good, some bad. There could be a lot of factors going into these systems, like are they tracking student use of the system, and did they evaluate the system for usability? And there could be a lot of things going on, but again, it's kind of promising, kind of, I don't know, maybe this is the trough of disillusionment in the Gartner hype cycle. Student skills change. There were 2 articles that both found, one found an increase in student self-awareness accuracy, and then the other one had basically showed increased interest. So promising results related to student skill change. Skills being defined as motivation or self-regulation or something like that. Not very many articles were talked about tracking student use of the system, and if they did, it was mostly an aggregate. For example, the students had on average 50 clicks per week or 50 clicks over the course of the semester, and they're not really looking at this student saw that they were doing bad at this concept, and so they reacted in this way. And so I think that's where future research needs to go, is really looking and trying to understand how students are interacting with these kinds of systems. Practitioner recommendations, I don't have a lot of time, so maybe I'll just let you guys read those. Again, everything's online at bobbodily.com. Basically just a whole bunch of questions related to the categories that we talked about, and then some future research areas as well. We kind of talked about these along the way, so that's it. Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned a very low percentage of papers which had taken into account student voice. I wonder if you had any thoughts about why that is. Is it related to the emerging field, as you said, or is it perhaps a lack of value placed on student voice, do you think?
Yeah, so the question is, what do I think about the low percentage of student voice in the current research on these systems? And I mean, a lot of times you ask students what they want, and they say, I want to compare how I'm doing with the class, and I want to know like my progress. And so I think sometimes students don't really know what they want, and so maybe that has something to do with it, or it could also be just it's an emerging field and you can't do everything. So that's not really an answer, but I think it's a good question. Yeah. Yeah.
So did any of the courses you were looking at, did they include gamification to try and get students, interested in that kind of dynamic with the system?
Good question. So the question is, were there any systems that were gamified or had a gamification component? And I would say yes, there were. Off the top of my head, I don't remember there being a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious to know why you chose to, if I understand your criteria correctly, why you chose to only use visualizations that had a comparison of the student to others, as opposed to also including a comparison of the student potentially against some other benchmark, like a mastery benchmark.
Yeah, I probably just forgot to say it, but that would also count. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'm really impressed that you've done this work and gathered together what we know about these student-facing systems. I'm wondering whether I'm the only person in the room who's thinking, my goodness, we've been working at this for more than 7 years, making these systems. We've not got that much evidence. You've only found 4 that actually looked at, in a particularly rigorous way, and over 150 and an RCT.
Right.
And of those, we had 3, no significant difference, and 1, there is a significant difference. With publication bias, my guess is there's probably no effect there. Isn't that a really big deal for us?
So the question is, for those listening, we've spent many, many years on these types of systems and only seeing 1 with significant difference and 3 not, based on the rigorous research design. Isn't it disheartening? The answer, I think, is yes. Yeah.
Kirsten.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to say what I think. Sort of in response to the first question and also Doug's point. The problem I think that we have is that those of us who do research in a more qualitative sense, we do ask students what impact these have that aren't necessarily just outcome grade related, but what impact does it have on self-regulation, what impact does it have on motivation. When we submit them to journals and to LAK conferences, they often get rejected because they
That's also disheartening, but we can talk after.
Yeah, so I think another piece of this that I think it is often missed, kind of the area of my research is when and how you ask the questions has a huge impact on what data you get back through those questions. And so, I think as we focus on capturing feedback from students in the actual use through the interfaces of the software in the flow of activity, you will get very good feedback, most likely, depending on how you word those questions and keep them to a single question at a time. And I think you get much better information from student use through those processes. So I think that would be an important contribution to getting better information.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more?
Two more first, yeah.
Okay.
And I'll add to those two comments because one of the things we've been finding is actually it's not the dashboard per se that's important, it's actually how it's embedded with the pedagogy and the assessment.
Yeah.
Most of these trials are focusing on just building another bloody dashboard, and actually it's a waste of time. Like, you know, we've got a lot of dashboards out there now, and really we need to be starting to unify our efforts and thinking about how we can get these student-facing dashboards into some sort of an interesting pedagogical framework, and that's where the results will come from. Right? But yes, there's a very few studies being done there. We only
Yeah.
stumbled on that last year ourselves.
And then was there one more?
Yeah, sorry, just about, I mean, a lot of the students I teach just look at sort of like Blackboard output, just to look at the stuff they need. And is that a dashboard or what is it? If you have Blackboard in the view mode, are you using that to get a lot of information? How would you rate that? It's not a dashboard, I expect, but it's still being used to actually get a lot of the information that students want.
Can you just rephrase that to make sure that I understand?
Yeah, so it's not a dashboard as such, but it's still an LMS system providing the external interface to the student. So the student can go onto it and find out lots of information.
That's true.
It might not be as extensive as that pretty flashing lights as some of the other dashboards.
Right.
It provides sort of basic basic levels of information and assessment, and they get the information through that.
That's true. I've never seen a comparison of LMS versus non-LMS.
Without this
But,
basic element still. So-
Yeah, that's true. That's an interesting point.
We can take one more question.
One last lucky question.
Okay then.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.